Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and, excuse me, um, walk you through some high level positioning and kind of where we are, what I'm seeing as the head of sales here in the United States, where we're seeing our business. But in general, we are 100% focused on driving and optimizing marketing operations. And this includes the spend side and the efficiency side. As marketing gets more and more complex, these large marketing organizations have huge number of internal and external resources that help them execute. They're spending piles of money on both traditional advertising and digital advertising. And there's a tremendous amount of creative work being done. All of this has to come together and be managed appropriately. We do not deliver the marketing. We're not the engine that actually shows the ad to you when you're online um, or when you're searching Google. We're not delivering when to show Ted, a particular ad, but we are this platform that the company uses to make sure all of that information is ready to go and be delivered through the channels that it gets delivered through. Um, I note that Michael mentioned this. Our roots are in Europe, in Germany, south of Frankfurt. The reason this is important is because the platform was built from its inception as multilingual, multi-currency, multicultural. It's very, very difficult in some parts, the bigger the company gets, to take a global marketing campaign and make it relevant regionally and locally around the world. It has to be brand compliant. There has to be different languages, the imagery used. So we tend to be very successful with clients that have some sort of global marketing requirement, but it's not necessary. Just know that our roots, because the system was built in Europe where you can travel 100 miles in either direction and be in a completely different country, that's at the fabric of the product. So we don't have to worry about that if you end up with a client that has those requirements. Our customer base, and he touched on this as well, we've been very successful here in the US. And obviously a lot of the big names we initially had were in Europe, but we've been successful in the last few years adding some really great brands despite our size. This year alone, in the last several months, we've added IKEA, Best Buy, Disney, Marriott has been a customer now for a couple years here. So very big and well-known brands using Brandmaker here. So you won't have to worry about your traditional startup where you're talking about no-name companies. And they are pretty well distributed across verticals. The thing to keep in mind is that we do tend to excel with companies that have a fairly large marketing organization and spend, because we are on the more pricey side of things. So if they have at least 30 people in their marketing department, and generally if their revenue, is getting closer to the $1 billion mark, as opposed to, $100 million, their total company revenue, those are sweet spot customers for us. We have plenty of customers that are in the, they may only do a $500,000 or $500,000 of revenue, but most of them are going to be bigger because they have bigger problems. We have great coverage now with Forrester. We're a leader in the major analysts who cover our space, which is known as Marketing Resource Management. But I wanted to make a note to everybody today that we're working very closely with Gartner. We were a leader with them for 6 years running before they dropped this name and this particular category from their analyst coverage. And they're going to be coming back out with it. And it looks like it's going to be repositioned as Marketing Operations Management. You'll start to see that reflected in our own website as we go into 2021. But Marketing Operations Management is actually a much better, I think, description of what our platform offers and our solution sets. Marketing Resource Management is a bit of a dated term and gets people thinking more about project and resource management. This is a much more holistic view of the world when you're talking about operations. But great coverage we have here will also make your conversations easier. Forrester defined MRM as covering kind of 4 key areas in the marketing operations realm. Money, So how do I plan for my year? What am I going to spend where? What brands are going to get the money? How much I'm going to spend in different countries? Where am I going to put my limited resources? How am I going to measure my performance? And what kind of visibility am I going to provide to that performance across the executive teams and so forth? The people side is actually getting the work done. So we know we want to do this. Now we have to go decide what we're going to do and get it assigned to creative teams and agencies and so forth to execute. The content is what they produce, and we need somewhere to put that content and get it out to all the different channels where it needs to go. And a lot of times content production is done in-house, but many times it's done by external agencies or both. So there's a content element, and then you've got this brand element, which is getting it distributed to the different channels in a uniform way so that the brand integrity is maintained. If you have people around the world hacking the content to make it fit their local use cases, sometimes things get messed up. So this is how Forrester defines it. But I think we're going to talk a little bit more about how we see the world as well. And you're going to see a lot of new terminology coming out in 2021 around this concept of marketing operations management. I will say that this is driving a renaissance in our particular solution category. The fact that marketing has changed so unbelievably in the last 15 years. 15 years ago, a billion-dollar company had generally around a $40 million marketing budget, and that's only gone up about 10%. They're about 44 million today. They worked with about 8 agencies 15 years ago. Now some of them are working with as many as 93 on average, because you have specialty agencies on social media, on paid search, on all sorts of things that are highly technical. You had fewer projects, but they were longer. I'm doing a Super Bowl commercial. I'm doing billboards. I'm doing print ads. They were traditional projects. Now you have 8,000, 9,000 fast-moving projects that are moving almost on a daily basis to feed all of these digital channels. And the project durations have collapsed from 8 weeks to like a week and a quarter. This has caused a huge amount of disruption in operations in a traditional company. So this is what's driving the need for technology to keep up, to manage all of this. So transparency, automation, getting the data fast enough on your results in real time to make changes. In the year of COVID, this was an incredibly complicated. People had marketing plans and budgets aligned, and then in March, they got turned on their heads, and they had to shift money and people and resources and time and what they were going to do to try to get through this whole COVID thing. That's a big problem when data is, where people are traditionally planning on an annual basis, they're having to plan much faster now, and then monitoring performance fast enough so that they can make changes. So when we think of the world of marketing in our software, we think of it in 5 key pillars. I'm not using module names here intentionally, because I want you to think about this more in terms of where a customer might be having pain in their overall marketing operations process. And I want to go through each of these pillars, and I will speak to the modules that we deploy in our software to address the pillar. And then Drew will actually walk you through some live examples of how these work. So those are the 5 big buckets that Brandmaker focuses on. And when someone contacts us or we have a conversation, it can be in one of these areas or it can be in all 5. But generally, there's a pain point that we're focusing on first. The entry point can be very different depending on the client. Budget planning and management is putting the strategy together and assigning dollars to it. It's very high level. We maybe strategic objectives, target audiences, etc. This is the context for what you're going to do as you move through the year and each quarter, etc. The key module here, I put it in red, is our marketing planner. There are other modules that work in this package, but that marketing planner is the key to this part of the product. Number 2, campaign planning and execution, is the workflow. Get my brief electronified, get it approved by the right people. We want to spend $50,000 on this campaign. We want to do these different things. And then we want to make sure that this project gets approved and allocated to the resources that we have. That's a job manager module. Our job manager is our workflow component and gets all of that done. I'm going to skip through this slide really quickly, but again, we plan the briefs, we get them signed to production, we get everything localized for all the different markets, we allow the localized markets to run their campaigns, and then we measure how they're doing. The third one, content creation and distribution, again, key modules, job manager, which is workflow, review manager, which you'll hear us in a second talk about in our demo, is really a redlining and annotation tool that during a workflow, a whole team of people can be redlining a Photoshop file, an InDesign file, marking up a video, and getting people to agree on what the final version looks like before it gets released into our media pool, which is the library where the final copy goes and gets published out to the world. And this is just for more visual, again, brief. This is in the production area. Brief the creative, different than briefing the campaign. Task out the creative tasks, get the production agencies to produce it, make sure it gets blessed by the company, and then make sure that it goes out to market and you start to measure whether it works. And that's a cyclical loop here on revising it and making it better. And then lastly, there's a lot of collaboration that happens here. So as things are moving through, you've got a lot of meetings, you've got a lot of feedback loops, et cetera. We can help centralize all of that mess so that there's an actual audit trail on why we got to where we are when we finally went out the door. And then brand management side is, again, it's more portals and templating, self-service, editing online, et cetera. We won't spend a whole lot of time on that, but there are some companies where they have brand managers. Their whole job is to make sure that whatever the brand guidelines are and the design standards that they're using are actually enforced, no matter where the brand is displayed, no matter what channel it's displayed in, no matter what market and language. So there's a lot of brand guidelines and corporate identity rules and so forth. Having a portal to describe what those are and have you get the proper logos and everything else you need is another big part of marketing. And then we already talked about performance measurement, and Drew will show you this, but you're going to execute, monitor, and measure and optimize everything, but that requires a tremendous amount of reporting. And we're going to show you how these reports look and how the feedback comes back into the tool. So that's all I wanted to do in terms of describing the overall platform. It's a lot to take in. Any one of those 5 pillars could be in and of itself a very large opportunity for you should you run across it. It's very rare that you find a company that's trying to do all of those same things at the same time, but it does happen. But in generally, you're going to have conversations with people who are in different parts of marketing who care about different things. And the higher up the food chain, the better.
And there's one question that did come in. Is procurement? Yeah, Loretta asked, is procurement an appropriate place to start?
Not really, not procurement, but the marketing planners. There are people who plan the marketing activities for a company, and there are corresponding people in finance, like the CFO, but he generally has, the CFO will have someone assigned to kind of the marketing finance role. They have to track how much they've committed in terms of marketing spend and where they are in their budgets. That's not really procurement, specifically procurement. It's more of a financial management role in the company. Anybody who has the term finance in their or planning in their titles would be good people to talk to there.
Okay, and then Scott asked, does Brandmaker concentrate on any particular vertical?
Our number one verticals are consumer product companies, Kellogg, Procter and Gamble, those type, anybody who's selling consumer products, because they have complicated and large marketing organizations and lots of money. So if you have somebody who's selling some sort of consumer products, JM Smucker is a client. They sell, I used to think they only sold jelly, but at half the stuff on the grocery store, from Milk-Bone dog biscuits to different types of coffee to everything else, you know, they, each one of their brands is almost like a company, right? So if you sell Milk-Bone, you could have $50 million in marketing just for dog biscuits or your dog products. Those companies are the best companies to go after. So I would say consumer product companies are great. We also focus on retailers like Best Buy and IKEA and so forth. The retailers that aren't pure e-commerce, ones that have stores and they sell through physical stores, maybe through partner stores, as well as through their own website. The more channels that they have, the better. Again, they spend a lot of money on marketing. And then financial services has been huge for us. So the third big area, we just closed TD Bank. We have Hanover Insurance. We have Metropolitan Life. We have First Republic Bank in San Francisco. We're seeing a lot of interest from large financial services organizations and insurance investments, et cetera. One of the reasons is because they are having to do to market to consumers, but they also have brokers they have to go through and market to, and they have a lot of compliance requirements. It's important that stuff gets approved before somebody publishes it out, because they're going to go to jail if it says something wrong. So that's another good one. Those are the top three.
And then you've also, I think, you've also made some headway, certainly in auto and travel and travel, so hospitality.
Yes, the only reason I don't mention hospitality now is we've pivoted our folk, even though we have Marriott, it's a great client, and we have some others. It's an industry that's been destroyed. I mean, literally worse than 9/11. So stay away from it if you want to make any money, including casinos, everything else. We will come back to that when it makes sense.
Okay, thank you for having me. And I'll be walking you through, as Ted said, this fictitious company, MRM Sports. And I'll be talking about a couple different things today as we go through each of the modules. But one of the first things that I want to call attention to, even though Ted had mentioned this before, know that out of the box, we are a multilingual and multi-currency system. And the added benefit of that is the system is highly configurable and can be personalized and adjusted in a variety of ways, which allows us to really adapt to any vertical that we've come across. I don't think there's anything where we've been hard stop. No, we probably can't help you. So that's one of the major benefits here. When the user logs into the system, they're either going to log in through a URL or they're going to log in through single sign-on or SSO. And this allows us to assign that user to their particular roles, their business units, and how they behave inside their organization and what they do on a daily basis. And one of the first things that they're going to see is essentially a homepage. This homepage is highly configurable. This is done with low code or no code. Users can come in, add their own widgets. You can build these for different business units. So someone logging in from the sales side, they might be curious about maybe different campaigns that are going on to see what the latest assets are that are inside the dam. They can have their filters predetermined based on these pages, look at that content before even diving in and trying to hunt something down. This can also be used to direct people to areas such as support and guidance for the platform, or even internal practices to nurture ideas and different automation and things like that. So this is a great way to unify the platform, but also to channel users to their different work streams in order to facilitate how they work on a day-to-day basis. So from here, we will jump into the marketing planner. And this is where we're able to do our strategic budgeting and planning for our organization. Right off the bat, you'll see that in this module, there's two key things. On the left-hand side, there's a structure. And then on the right-hand side, we have a Gantt calendar. And what we're seeing here is essentially their marketing plan. We're seeing the in and out of market dates for different campaigns and activities as far down in their operational structure as they want to go. And what I mean by that is, if we look at this hierarchy on the left-hand side, we'll just collapse it real quick for MRM Sports. They then have this broken up by region, even by their headquarters at a global level. And then as we go down each step through USA to then something like Major League Baseball or the NFL, we can then get down to different campaigns and activities. And we could keep going if we wanted to do specific channels and things along those lines. This structure is freely configurable. Different businesses might do it, in this case, by region. Others might do it by brand or by product. This could also be done by agency or different types of initiatives. In the case of IKEA, they actually go down to the individual store level, and they have their stores contributing their actual marketing plans while still being able to see what the global initiatives are. With the Gantt view, other than just seeing the in and out of market dates and seeing color coding for different activities, again, all of which are configurable, we solve a common problem for marketers, which is they often don't necessarily have a reference of what creative or what content is being used for that campaign for that duration. And we solve this using what we refer to as content enrichment. And all the user has to do is just mouse over a timeline and they can see what's being used. This could link to different documents. It can be videos. It can also be reports. So they don't have to go and bug the creative team for a PowerPoint file or a PDF to say, hey, what's actually being done? They can see this directly on their plan and understand what's going on.
It takes them way too long. Disney told me that it was taking way too long just to get their Bing and Google spend actual numbers rolled up to finance at the end of every month. They didn't know what was happening. There was like a gap. They dumped the numbers out of Google. They try to massage them. They hire interns to put them in a spreadsheet. They try to roll it up to the general ledger. They try to go into the boardroom and say where they are. It's a nightmare for the people who actually have to do it. So we can speed that up by bringing in the data automatically and mapping it to the plan.
Yep. So with that, integration, of course, is a key component here. People don't want to have to go in and manually key in all of this data. It's very common for Brandmaker to be integrated with ERP and financial systems, even going through to the point of, and I'll show with an example here, with this Super Bowl season promo, we can integrate disparate systems and bring in KPI data in order to have that mapped to these different activities and campaigns. And then, of course, you have one system for that ROI. You have your KPIs, you have your budget, you have your time, you have the different metrics such as your targeting information and things like that. And it really gives you this macro understanding of how marketing is performing and what campaigns and initiatives are working. Briefly, I'll just touch on this. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but Marketing Planner does include some best practice reports where users can go in and get a quick understanding of something. How's the budget spread out between different areas of the plan structure? What KPIs or campaigns performed really well for those KPIs? Things like that. But usually whenever someone wants to do kind of that high level intelligence reporting on the business, they will end up using Reporting Center, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Another quick sales perspective, you'll find hundreds of contacts in LinkedIn and otherwise at a large company that have marketing analytics in a title. That's because the amount of analytical data on campaign performance is huge. They have data warehouses that have it filled up with click data. They can tell you, people under 30 with one leg on a Tuesday bought, umbrella when it was raining out. They have every single bit of data that you can ever imagine inside of Facebook, LinkedIn, Google, Adobe, the website. But getting that aggregated, normalized, and rolled up to an executive view that ties to the plan and budget is a whole nother story. So we're not the source of a lot of that performance data, but we are a target point to roll it up and normalize it and suck it into Brandmaker so we can make sense of it, right? So if somebody wants to shift some money, I got to see it in a way that makes sense. I'm not going to log into 15 different systems and try to make sense of it. So that's the sales point of view here.
While we're still on the topic of Marketing Planner, Dennis had a question here. He said, building out these views seems like it would be resource intensive for the prospect. Is there a reference point for the amount of resources needed to build these views out, and how much time does it take? Use Amazon as a reference point. Ted, if you want to take that over.
If you start a customer on just taking their Excel, they'll have one, believe me. Forget about the budgeting side for a minute, but they have something. The bigger the company, the more likely they have something. There's a plan somewhere. We have the ability to import in the structure. We can create the structure through an import. We can import numbers. There's Excel importers. You can bill it out really quickly, actually, in the tool, and that doesn't take very long. Some of the consulting that goes into, well, how do you want to look at your plan? You want to look at it by age group, target, strategic priority. Some of that they probably already have because they're building pivot tables and doing things like that. So we can get that through consulting. If it's a re-engineering initiative, that has nothing really to do with the software. It's more about what do you want to have fall out of the system. We'll get that from them. 90 days from start to go live on a planner implementation is generally a good target, including the discussions and the configuration. A customer can build this thing out themselves. We're not going to show you how that's done here because we don't have enough time. It's 100% web-based. There's importing tools, and even though it looks like a lot of information here, it's pretty easy to self-configure. If you click just on settings, Drew, for a second, just show them, for instance, how do you want to set up your colors? Like this is a trade show, should be yellow. Email campaigns should be purple. You can set up your own little categories, and it's all web-based. We have a training program to help you do it so that you're not relying on us when we leave you. But if you tell somebody 90 days for rolling out the planner without integration to SAP, because that's usually going to be a phase 2 if they have a financial system they want to tie in. But if they're just doing the straight web-based deployment, a 90-day number is pretty good.
So the next piece of the puzzle is the job manager. So with Job Manager, this is where we are handling our workflow processes. We're doing our data intake. This is also where we are handling creative production components, approvals, you name it. With this, there are, of course, a variety of ways to look at and handle this information. The first of which I'm showing here is just your typical list view. This is something that's completely configurable. Users can drag and drop columns, sort any which one they want, and of course, add any columns that are specific to the different job types that they have in the system. And to clarify that terminology, a job is a project. It could be a campaign, a request form. It's just the universal term that we use for basically that data intake. We can actually see in this example here that we have 2 different job types. One's campaign, one's production. With this view, let's say with campaign job type, we're collecting budget information. We could have that column exist here as well. So we can analyze and sort and filter on any of the information that exists in the system here. We, of course, also have a couple other views. One that I'll touch on very briefly is another Gantt view. This is different from the marketing planner in that this is showing the production turnaround. The marketing planner was showing our in and out of market dates for the campaigns, so basically the marketing effort. This is the behind the scenes to get to that point. If we expand on any of these, we can actually see different elements of the workflow. So these are different workflow steps. The first 3 were all completed, and they were all completed on the same day. And you'll notice that this actually then, of course, adjusts the communication stage. So rather than starting down here after that duration, because this was completed here, everything shifts over. So it's dynamic in that regard and will help people stay on task and keep things moving forward with accurate prediction dates of when things should be completed. So if we go down over here, this should actually be completed on December 31st this year. With this view, we can of course see user assignments. If something is overdue, we can see how many days it's overdue, things like that, as well as requested deadlines for particular projects. So in some cases, this might overlap like we see here. And in that case, the user that's handling this request might have to reach out and say, hey, we can't meet that deadline. Can we do some adjustments here? For those that want to work in a more agile approach, they can also use our Kanban board or card view, a very Trello-like marketing experience. This is where users can drag and drop in order to provide approvals or rejections for things. It can also indicate the priority of particular requests. So in this case, these 2 here, if Jackie was actually assigned to both of these, we could actually drag this up to the top and say ABC initiative is priority, and Jackie can then act on that. These are broken up based on workflow. So in this case, the campaign workflow has briefing, approval, preparation, and execution. We can see that information here. And then if we look at different workflows such as production, or we have a scoring project over here, we can see those different workflows. And this is all based on our filters, and our level of access. So we're able to very intuitively channel people where they need to be. You also don't have to worry about cross-contamination between different business units and things like that. So for a job itself, I'll actually use this BTS campaign, this back to school campaign. The jobs are configured using low code or no code. It's done with a WYSIWYG editor, so what you see is what you get. Users click a button, add a specific field, configure that field, and then just drag it onto the form wherever they see fit. Because of this, it's very easy to create a variety of different fields, everything from doing date pickers to doing drop-down lists where users can have different configured values. These fields can also be done at a conditional level. So in the case of, let's say we have Europe here, then we have our subset for Europe. We can see France, Germany, etc. If I were to switch this to Americas, and then I'm going to have different options for that. So we're able to intuitively build out this information. And a lot of times this works really well when paired with a financial aspect, in that we can speak a marketer's language using an example like GL code, where you might have 001 dash something, something, something. The marketer typically doesn't care for that. They care what's the business, what's the product. They can select those values here and let the back end of the system compile information like that. This is where we're going to collect everything that we need to know about a campaign, about a project, anything along those lines that's important and relevant to that workflow process. And with that, we're able to make sure that fields are required at particular steps in the workflow. We can show and hide them based on those steps in the workflow. And this can also be done based on particular tabs as well. And this makes sure, again, that we're focusing the users on exactly what they need to see, not overloading them with a bunch of different information that isn't relevant to them or isn't necessary at that point in time. The field types, I think we have something like 17 different field types, everything under the sun, drop-down list, check boxes, even going as far as doing some crazy selections, and even doing, let's see, I think under communication, we can do some more proprietary things like the one that we have here, where we have some target selection as well. Even going as far as doing grids. So if users are still comfortable in an Excel-like experience and they want to add rows, type things in, and do calculations and formulas, we can do that within the job. The job is more than just that, though. It's more than just collecting that data. You'll notice that there's a couple other areas of the UI here. Along the top, we have some controls, such as saving and undoing our changes. You'll also notice that as I save this here, that we have a link to the marketing planner. And this is where we tie back, kind of do a subtle integration within the marketing planner itself. All of the details and things like that that we're collecting, the target group, channel, whatever the case may be for the customer, all of that can be synced up with the planner. And what this allows you to do is, whether you're starting in the plan or starting in Job Manager, that data can be passed back and forth. And this allows people to be very agile. So in the case of COVID-19, the new campaigns coming up, we didn't have this on our plan. We can go ahead and kick off the briefing process, get that approved. Once it's approved, it can be automatically inserted into the planner. Then this button exists, and we can jump straight to the budget view or the calendar view from Job Manager and check and see how that sits in our plan. So it's a very cool functionality that ties everything together.
Most companies have two ways that marketing activities get entered into the operational plan. The planners plan it and say, okay, we're going to do this campaign. It's going to start next Wednesday, and we're going to spend 20 grand on it, and it's going to do this and that. And then that goes downstream from there. The other way is somebody in the company requests something. Sales guy needs a new brochure. My partner needs a new something for his website or whatever. That's intake. And these forms can direct that work to the right people and debit the money from the right part of the budget and do all that stuff. So these intake forms are pretty important. They can all have their own flow, their own workflow and data collection. Reporting is only good in marketing based on how clean the data is. So remember, we were showing you before where you could sort and filter your view of the plan. Show me everything that we're doing for kids in social media. Well, if the campaign was never tagged with social media or never tagged with target group kids, then how are you ever going to see that? So this is a way to kind of put some process discipline around data collection as you're getting things assigned, and making sure that it stays in sync.
So with staying in sync, It's very important for users to understand the status of a job, where it is in the workflow, how things are performing, and of course, being able to report on time taken for particular steps. One of the key indicators for that, if you're inside the job itself, is the breadcrumb chart up here at the top. Workflows can be configured in a variety of different ways. This example here is just a 4-step workflow process. We can see that briefing and approval have already been completed, and we're currently in preparation. The system will automatically notify users if they're approaching their due date for their particular task in this workflow. And if needed, if customers want to have 50 workflow steps, 3 workflow steps, whatever the case may be, all of that can be done. Very briefly, without going too technical on this side, we have 2 workflow engines. One's a very linear, straightforward process. The other is a BPMN workflow engine, or business process model and notation. It's an industry standard way of doing complex process mapping. It allows you to do conditional branching, parallel tasks, and things like that. A good example that I like to use is with TV. Oftentimes, someone's doing storyboarding, they're writing the script, they need to book the actors or the studio space and things like that. All of those tasks can happen simultaneously in the system, and they can be given off to different teams at different points in time, all while still being a single project or job inside the system. In addition to this, we of course have the ability to do parent-child relationships with these projects or jobs. In the case
Drew,
of
we're
this,
running pretty short on time. So one thing I want to make sure before we move into the DAM is, so the job again is intake form, data collection, workflow process, getting the tasks assigned. There's collaboration on the side there where you can have discussions with people who aren't even involved in the workflow to get feedback. But this is the part where the workflow might end up needing to collect files, right? We need to get the creative attached. This is a tab in the workflow that would show up later on when it gets into the creative team, where they're going to attach their work and see whether we can get it approved.
Exactly. So with this process,
does that require having the DAM application or no?
No. The nice thing is that the DAM is actually kind of in there under the covers, but it's a limited access. Like they don't have to buy the DAM to get access to this attachment and redlining capability. If they have the workflow tool, all this, if you attach a Photoshop file or InDesign file, you can still redline it. People who don't have those tools can still participate. So it's a really nice feature.
Great. So when assets need to be approved and reviewed inside the system, there's a couple of different ways to do it. One is just to provide a quick approve reject on assets. And we can see an indicator over here on the left-hand side. But if we need to have redlining or annotation on that, we can then invite users into a review or a brief, if you will. With this, we can, of course, select individuals. We can invite different participants from elsewhere. So if we need to bring in users that aren't a part of this workflow process, they can still come in and contribute. We have the ability to assign those users specific roles within that review. Do they have the ability to approve or reject it, or can they just provide feedback and give their 2 cents, if you will? When we actually go into a review itself, that's where we're able to take advantage of the annotation and the markup and have additional discussion and collaboration. Users can use very intuitive tools to just provide little icons and add little comments. This could be freeform drawing, doing circles and rectangles and things like that. Let's just say adjust contrast. And users can come in and they can contribute to this. Once everything has been said and done, the user can then either approve or reject, or they can request a new iteration. When they request a new iteration, this is where we have some interesting functionality that's great, particularly if they're working with external agencies or partners that are handling creative processes. Outside of the ability to change who's responsible for it and providing additional context to the review, we can actually pick and choose what feedback is shown, what's required, or completely exclude it. So in the case of adjusting the contrast, we could say that that's required. The user that's going to provide the adjustments for this content, they're going to be able to see that and then make that change. If something isn't constructive or you want to actually hide that, maybe it's internal discussion, someone's not happy about how the agency's performing, you can exclude that entirely and they're not going to see it, but that's still something that's going to be logged inside the tool and you can still report on it internally. Without going too far forward, we can compare iterations side by side, and that can be done with multi-page documents. It can be done with images as well as the videos. The cool thing about videos is you don't have to send an email saying, hey, check out 1 minute and 30 seconds. Whenever you create a comment or annotation like this within the video, it creates a little thumbnail with a timestamp. So you can just click right on it and jump straight to that spot and see that feedback. All of this, it doesn't require any special plugins. No one needs any special software. So it doesn't matter if the user is uploading an Adobe file like Photoshop or InDesign. The user can come in, access those files directly through this, whether they're in finance, the CMO, or someone that might not have that software. So it allows everyone to come in and participate and give their feedback when necessary. It says high-level job manager. So now tying it all together would be the third piece, which is media pool. Now that we've planned our content, we've gone through workflows, excuse me, very quickly, as well as reviewing that content, we need a place to store it, distribute it, allow users to find it. This is done inside media pool, and this is the dam. This user experience is very intuitive and it's very personal. Users can come in and can configure their view. They can adjust their faceted search in a variety of ways. And whether they search by folders, whether they search by keywords or different types of metadata, such as the campaign name or the product, they're going to be able to come in here and find the asset based on the method that they prefer. So again, if they're thinking in folders, if they're thinking keywords, they're going to be able to find it. This user experience allows for infinite scrolling, so you don't have to go page by page. You just scroll to your heart's content, and if you need to adjust your search, you just scroll back up a little bit, and you can go in and modify things. The way the search is handled with a faceted manner is kind of twofold. One, we of course have our widgets here, but there's many, many, many more. And these can be customized and personalized based on different business units. So someone from the sales side might care, in this case, more about clothing or sports based on this particular company. They might care about campaign names. Someone else might want to come in and see things based on a technical data or the type of agency that's in here. And this view, let me actually select a better option here. Let's do publisher and publication data. You'll notice by changing the view, this also changed the widgets. Users can save their own personal views that have their own setup of widgets. And what's cool about this is it's not just changing the widgets, it's also saving that search. So if I do jackets and hoodies, we'll see that the clothing is actually filtered for that, and it's also focusing on hiking. So someone can create a single view specific to logos or their financial report or annual report or something along those lines. And in 2 clicks, they can go and repeat that search without having to click on a widget, find that correct keyword or anything along those lines.
Those filters, the filtering like you do, you're surfing Home Depot. I want to narrow down to lamps, finish type brass, cost under $30. That's basically what we're doing here with all of these assets, giving them very intuitive filters based on the type of stakeholder they are and what their search use case is. Because they may want to find and reuse it. We use this tool for our own sales team to go find, content for brochures and so forth. But marketers are looking for a certain image type or a certain logo. So they might have different ways that they search than a sales team would.
Exactly. And on top of all of that, if we actually, let me just reset my view here. We'll go back to the generic search. As Michael had mentioned earlier, we have AI tagging for images that's sitting on the back end. And what this allows us to do is something that's really very cool. When we look at the asset details view here, of course, it's everything under the sun that you would expect the DAM to have, the ability to download that file in the original format, to convert it, to send it by emails, to send as a favorite or add it to a personal collection. But I want to point out that we only have 4 tags on this file. We have sports, nature, outdoor, and clothing. And of course, the asset name itself. And if I do a search here and I do something like flora, that's probably a term that no one's really ever going to use, but it actually returns the result. And that's because of the automatic keywords that we have in here. And we are integrated with Google, Amazon, IBM, Microsoft, and Clarify. And they all have different strengths and weaknesses. But the major gain here is that it reduces the amount of tagging that the marketing team or the librarian, if you will, has to go through for these assets. They can just focus on what's the product, what's the campaign, is there any core metadata that's essential to this image, and then you let the AI tag do the abstraction. What might someone be wearing? Is there something in the scene like a mobile phone or a computer? Are they amongst flowers in this case? And what that allows users to do is they can then find assets that they might not have found before because they're thinking abstractly. They don't care about the campaign. They care maybe if someone's happy or are they holding a beer or a wine glass in their hand. And then they can find those assets that really no one's going to be able to tag all of that information with at any point in time. Outside of this, Media Pool, of course, has a wealth of other tools and functionality, everything from versioning to doing different things like variants, which allows you to group similar assets together underneath one asset. And I'll just show a brief example of that because I think it's cool. So in this case, we have the MRM Sports logo. And if I was to do a search for logo right now, I would only find this result. However, it's not the only one. Variants allow me to have the black and white version or just the icon here, and those can be nested together. And that helps clean up the search so you're not confused as to what file you need to use. But if it's still not quite what you need, you can look at something like variants for that.
And now we have public links you can share from the system, and private. You have links that would require the user to log in to get the asset and identify themselves. But now we also have public links you can create if you wanted to just share, kind of like more of a Dropbox kind of scenario. You want to just send this file off to somebody. Some of these files in marketing obviously can give a huge. One thing that we like to do for the organization is encourage them to upload the master source file and manage that. So the master video, the master InDesign file, the master Photoshop file, not 15 versions of it. I need a PDF of it. I need a JPEG. I need this one version, and then let us auto convert it based on who the user is to what they need. I need a PDF with bleeds. I need a low-res PDF to share for sales online with my emails. Our servers in the background will produce the appropriate output file. So that's a really nice feature instead of putting a whole clutter full of file types that all represent the same thing. One other thing is you can't game the system. So if you take a file and you put it in, you change the file name and try to put it back in again, it's going to know it's the same file. So just because you change the name, it's not going to let you pollute the system with 500 versions of the same file. If there's one pixel difference, it'll let you do it. But other than that, it's going to keep garbage collection to a minimum. It's going to let you expire things automatically, all that stuff. Again, this is a DAM, so a demo of this could be an hour in and of itself. But we have all of these pieces in order to facilitate operational agility, and they all work together. Just depends on what a customer's struggling with.
Great. So we only have like 5 minutes left.
Yes.
As you can see, it's a very, very comprehensive, capable system. And it's sort of like drinking from a fire hose, but I appreciate Drew and Ted, trying to bring it down to something that shows the whole comprehensive system, but without too much detail. So that was great. Do we have any questions about the system, who it's targeted at? We have a few more minutes. If anybody wants to drop something in the chat, we'd be happy to address those questions. Obviously, things will come up. And if you think you have a lead at a CPG company, a finance company, an auto company, a retail company in particular, they need to be fairly big. I had said 100 million or more in marketing. I guess at 50 million would, $1 billion company, 50 million or more in marketing spend is probably a good target. The
$500 million companies will, if they're in the right segment, they will be fine. You might have a pure B2B company where they sell bolts to someone and they just don't get the marketing budgets right. So they still might do a lot of revenue, but they don't do a lot of marketing. It's a little bit different. But if you can take away these three things from this meeting, there's planning and budgeting, there's execution, right? There's basically workflow, task management, project management, get everything done, including processing inbound requests to the marketing team. And then there's put what you created somewhere where you can find it and reuse it, right? So that's really the three things. Plan and make sure the plan is a wrapper around everything. So we're not just doing things haphazardly, it rolls up to something. So plan, execute, and then do your management of the creative and get it automatically published and easily findable. Those are the three big buckets. And in those buckets, there's lots of other things that we could not possibly cover today. But we have, is anybody familiar with Vistaprint? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, how many of your opportunities start with just one module?
I would say the vast majority start with one or two modules. The DAM is a good example. If there's a DAM opportunity, it quite often starts with just the DAM, the digital asset management system, media pool in our case. The planner, we're signing a deal right now with a company in Florida called Masonite. They're a construction company. They sell construction products like doors and windows. They're a pretty big company, actually. Their phase one is just the planner, but we already have phase two high-level objectives for in Q1 to roll out workflow, and their creative teams are already kind of deciding how they want to use that. They're just going to buy the planner and do it first, and then they're going to move into workflow and work management next. If you were to sell the planner deal and you get that second phase in, which is quite common in the next quarter, that's still going to be your deal, right? It's just being phased in, right? So it's very common to start with one from a phasing perspective. We often like them to know that these multiple things exist, even if they're just buying one, just so they know that there's somewhere to go with this later. It might be a different team, but it's very, very common for 1 to 2 modules to be deployed at the first go.
Great. Okay, so there's obviously room for growth. Yeah, if you hit the biggest pain point, obviously where we think we can get a foot in the door, that's where to start.
Yes, and it grows quickly. Once you have their plan, imagine what you have their strategic marketing plan in the system. You're in a much better position than somebody who's just being used as a project tool down in some creative team. You're up at an SCMO level.
And even though Brandmaker is a small company, they've got some really big brands as customers. So don't be shy about mentioning those. They do pull a lot of weight.
They do.
So I want to thank everybody, particularly Ted and Drew, for making this happen. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. Obviously, any leads, please reach out to me. We're going to post this on the YouTube channel, and I will be also posting some of the materials, the sell sheets, presentations, etc., to our Slack channel, the one that's set up specifically for Brandmaker.